I'm surprised they didn't bring in, transgender, aliens. This was absolutely a fraud. This was a catastrophic failure. What did they get for all this, aside from the dead Renee Good, the dead woman? What did they get? They say they arrested 500 or detained 500 undocumented immigrants so far in.
We are seeing a masterclass in media manipulation get completely dismantled live on air. Conservative talking heads are twisting themselves into absolute pretzels, trying to justify the tragic shooting of Renee Good by federal agents, painting a routine interaction as some kind of life or death threat. They want you to ignore what your own eyes are telling you and blindly buy into their narrative that a driver slowly turning her wheel was somehow executing a deadly attack. But watching people like Tim Miller and Geraldo Rivera step up and shred these bad faith excuses in real-time shows just how fragile their whole spin really is. Before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
People are scared when they're acting in lawful self-defense is offensive. Basically, every way that Tim characterized that was just unbelievably uncharitable to the police officer who clearly shot in self-defense. He was directly in front of the vehicle when Miss Good hit the accelerator. Now, maybe she was going to continue turning, but maybe she wasn't. He was 2 feet in front of it. And that woman had just defied a lawful order to be detained. I mean, we have to understand, before this happened, and that's not, again, not to say that she deserved to be shot. This execution thing is so frivolous because it's not about her being given punishment for her actions. It's about her creating the scenario in which another person felt a reasonable fear of deadly injury. Well, she committed multiple felonies in this context. Parking her car in the middle of the road, obstructing a law enforcement investigation, and then finally aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. A car is not a trivial thing. And I mean, you think about police stops all over the country. The primary danger is people fleeing in their vehicles with which are 2 tons of metal coming at them. It's also not just self-defense; it's defense of others as well. There's a person hanging onto the side of the car right there who could easily be dragged along.
All right, but Will, you and I had an exchange on X about whether this constitutes domestic terrorism. I think that's such a ridiculous phrase to use about what we've all witnessed with our own eyes here. She's not a domestic terrorist. She wasn't trying to commit an act of terrorism against this ICE officer. Now, I happen to think that what may be a key part of this is that it emerged that 6 months earlier, the same ICE officer had been dragged by a car in a similar situation, hundreds of yards, and has suffered injuries and probably a lot of trauma, right? We don't know how much trauma, but how much was that playing on his mind when he's there? He's ignored his training, which is that ICE officers should not be standing in front of a car in that situation, nor should they fire at a moving vehicle. That's what they're trained not to do.
That last part is certainly incorrect. When you are allowed to fire at a moving vehicle in self-defense or in...
I think your life is in danger, right? Now the question. So the question is.
That's not.
I'm sorry. How does firing at a moving vehicle make you more safe? This doesn't even make sense, Piers. Again, she's barely moving. If you shoot someone, as we saw with that car, if you shoot someone driving,
I think the point I'm making, Tim,
they're going to lean forward and press on the gas.
Yeah, but Tim, I'll be
dangerous.
Let me bring it.
But this is standard policy.
Of the car.
The point I'm making is we don't know what was in anyone's minds. I think it's quite likely that what was in the mind of this ICE officer is what happened to him 6 months earlier, right? And it may be that he panicked because he feared the same thing happening again. I'm not excusing or justifying what he did. I'm explaining what may end up being one of the factors involved here. It doesn't seem to me to be irrelevant that the same guy was dragged by a car and could potentially have been killed in that incident 6 months earlier.
Everybody is ignoring the original sin. Hold on a second. I haven't spoken yet. Everybody is ignoring the original sin, which was to use a brigade-sized deployment of paramilitary forces to presumably or reportedly or the pretense was to go after the worst of the criminal aliens. Did that happen? Absolutely not. What happened instead? You had this deployment of these masked desperados, 2,000 strong, descending on the community with attitude. There was hostility on both sides from the get-go. And what in the world are paramilitary forces doing enforcing immigration law to begin with? This was a bait and switch. This was using the specter of immigration. I'm surprised they didn't bring in transgender aliens. This was absolutely a fraud. This was a catastrophic failure. What did they get for all this, aside from the dead Renee Good, the dead woman? What did they get? They say they arrested 500 or detained 500 undocumented immigrants so far in this operation in Minneapolis, in the Twin Cities. 500. How many of the 500 were the worst of the worst? Is it not a fact that 70% of the American people oppose the way this deployment has gone down? The Trump administration set the stage for this catastrophe, this tragedy to happen. The southern border, Piers, as you pointed out correctly, has been sealed now for months. There's zero influx of undocumented immigrants. So if the supply of the problem has been cut off, isn't it time now for President Trump to use some common sense and some compassion, for God's sakes?
Okay,
some compassion.
Can I respond?
Yeah, well, you respond, yeah.
Yeah. First, I mean, is there some list of federal laws that federal authorities are not allowed to enforce? You should probably inform them of that. I think that's a little bit ridiculous. And second, if we're going to go to
about? What are you talking nonsense? You're talking nonsense.
You're
Talk
basically
radio
saying the federal government's
nonsense.
not allowed to enforce immigration law because you actually need to bring in large numbers of
They
people.
are allowed
to
to enforce immigration laws. What they are not allowed to is to impose a police state with attitudes and long guns. When did you see
If you want to know who's at fault for that, it's the sanctuary jurisdictions.
When did you see mass cops? I don't know how much police work you've done. I've done a lot for the last over 50 years. You don't bring masked, heavily armed SWAT team, effectively SWAT team or Delta Force, a kind of combatants into a situation where the problem is undocumented immigration. If that's the problem, you go and you pursue the normal, ordinary, reasonable, prudent ways of dealing with the social problem. It's immigration. As I said, the supply has been cut off of immigrants. Now's the time. What about the dreamers, the kids brought here at an early age who've been here and committed no crime? Isn't it time for them to get... I think
your
that
specific
you're not
point,
far
I want to answer
afield.
two
Isn't the
specific
issue
points very quickly.
undocumented immigration? Isn't that what you're talking about? Illegal aliens, so-called? Isn't
you
that
say
what
they
we're
can't be
talking about?
masked? They're masked because the radical left and Antifa...
Cops are never masked. State troopers are never masked.
If you're mad about the
policy
policy question, can I just make this point? If you're mad about the policy problem, which is the fact that the administration needs to send in militarized forces that are ready for responses, that's because Minnesota has sanctuary state policies and doesn't cooperate with detaining criminal aliens. In other states, they don't need to send in BORTAC to detain people.
What's the rush?
Because
they did it here in New Orleans, Will.
Safely at the courthouse. It's the Minnesota state authorities that are responsible for creating dangerous situations like the one that happened in Minneapolis.
Okay, but look, Geraldo, we can obviously, none of this is irrelevant, but in terms of the actual incident itself, what do you feel about what happened there?
In my heart of heart, and remember, I've covered every war in Central America, every war in Middle East, Afghanistan, 11 assignments, Iraq, 11 assignments. I've seen guns and firing, and you know when to use your gun and when you don't use your gun. That was absolutely an awful, awful mistake by those officers who aggressively sought to confront, as you peers have clearly laid out. The woman in that car presented no threatening image. Look at the car. That's the weapon that makes her a domestic terrorist. That car moving at 2 miles an hour, then 5 miles an hour. The wheels clearly turn to the right. Come on, I'm sick of the excuses. It's one thing to have ideology and be as conservative as you want to be, but don't make up a situation with it fails right there. When you say domestic terrorist, I covered Timothy McVeigh, 1995, Oklahoma City. You want to see a domestic terrorist? He killed 168 American men, women, and children. That's a domestic terrorist, or the Unabomber,
yeah, that's
or
how,
Luigi
that's how I felt.
Calling Renee Good a domestic terrorist isn't just a stretch. It is gaslighting of the absolute highest order. Anyone watching the video with an ounce of objectivity can see the plain reality. Her wheels were turned away, the vehicle was moving at a crawl, and there was zero intent to use that car as a weapon. If she wanted to run an officer down, she wouldn't be steering away from him. Yet, the moment hyperpartisan talking points are on the line, the self-proclaimed defenders of family values suddenly have no problem smearing a dead mother. They will bend over backward to protect a political narrative rather than look at the clear facts on tape. Geraldo Rivera was 100% right to call out the sheer absurdity of comparing a minor traffic obstruction to actual acts of domestic terrorism. It's sickening to watch the spin machine try to reframe a tragic, avoidable incident into an attack on federal law enforcement just to save face. When ideologues prioritize tribal politics over basic human empathy and truth, this is the exact kind of shameless victim blaming you get.